Welcome to the Everything's Coming Up Marketing Podcast, where we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of marketing and mental health. On this show, oversharing is caring. I'm your host, Amber Rhodes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey y'all, thanks for listening to the Everything's Coming Up Marketing Podcast. I'm here today with Joe Hader. Joe deals with stress by
mostly binge eating, and if I can if I can remember to, breathing or going for walks.
if you can remember to breathe.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite breathing exercise?
I've kind of looked into a couple different options, but really it's the version of breathing that I can readily access, which is simply deep breaths in, slow breaths out. Nothing too fancy.
What about that helps you deal with stress?
So actually, interesting thing about breath is that I was nerding out trying to cope with intense levels of anxiety and trying to figure out. I just went down a huge rabbit hole of trying to figure out what can I possibly do about this. And I stumbled upon something called the polyvagal theory. And essentially, what the polyvagal theory addresses is the idea that you have more mature parts of your nervous system that are ancient. So these would be your fight, flight, or freeze responses. And then you have a quote unquote newer part of your nervous system, which would include your prefrontal cortex, where you logically think and how you speak and connect to others. And so a key to addressing, like, you don't really readily have access to that fight, flight, or freeze response. You don't really have control over it, much like you don't have control over your heartbeat. But one point of access that you do have is breathing, because breathing does in fact connect to that the vagus nerve.
That's super interesting. A little story about me last week is that out of nowhere, I deal with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting how anxiety, especially generalized anxiety disorder, is not tied to anything that's happening in real life. It'll just come on. And I was in a meeting, totally normal meeting. And my heart started beating really fast.
Oh man.
I wasn't in control. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And then I Googled breathing exercise because I didn't know why it would help, but I knew that it would. And then Google had me had my back and then gave me a 1-minute breathing exercise. It was just in, out, in, out. And it helped immensely. But I hadn't looked into why that actually works.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool little research activity to look into.
Yeah. And what is this about binge eating?
Yeah, so basically it's a method of emotionally coping. When I feel stress that exceeds my ability to at least immediately cope, I find myself turning to food, and that actually helps me feel better in the moment. And it's something that's, of course, I mean, I've got like 10 or more dysfunctional things. It's not like that's my one thing. I have many. but it's one of the things that I've realized, yeah, this is something that happens. It's something I have to be conscious of because it's what I do automatically. I go on autopilot. So if I don't actually stay aware of it, I'll just be like, okay, I'm just like downing a bag of chips now, and this is just what's happening. So yeah, that's pretty much the story.
When did you first become aware that if you go on autopilot, how did you finally clock that was something that you're doing?
Well, I think it really clicked for me. So there's very common to have a binge and purge cycle. So some people binge food, and then their purging mechanism is through self-induced vomiting or other methods. I realized that my method of trying to purge, which is like the negative consequence of the binging, was um, through exercise. So this one time, I just like did a whole lot of yard work. Yard work doesn't isn't typically crazy, but I was using a pickaxe and digging a trench and all that stuff. So I pushed myself way too hard for way too long, and later that day, I had awful back cramps and could barely walk. And I think the aftermath of that, I was like, man, something's weird with me. Like this isn't like a normal healthy thing. So then I started to kind of reflect about, when do I find myself like that? This seems like a purging thing. It's not like a normal activity. So then I kind of looked for the binging counterpart to that. That's kind of when I was like, oh yeah, I guess I do binge and purge. I never decided to do it on purpose. Just that's what it is.
That's really interesting, and I'm glad that you kind of demystified, let's say, the that binging and purging isn't necessarily what we see on TV or what we've heard about typically.
Although it
That
can be, I mean, it's really common
yeah,
for it to be that way. Yeah,
but it can be other things too, and maybe someone
totally.
else might hear that and think, "Oh, I do that as well."
Yeah, yeah. I actually know somebody who has an alternate method of purging as well, and it's not self-induced vomiting. Um, without getting too graphic, but there's many different ways. It's yeah, the dysfunction. I guess it kind of shows up in different ways. You want to be, but once you know it, I've actually have a pretty practical tool for that, and it's not directly related to the reduction of stress in the moment. But what I found myself is that if I'm feeling stressed, that's step one, and mild hunger, all it takes is mild hunger. Even if I'm feeling mildly hungry, then I'm loading up on carbs. And so I, one of the breakthroughs on diet I had recently was I can fill up on protein, things that are actually satiating rather than chocolate chips and a peanut butter spoon, which is like my go-to. Um, so yeah, getting satiated at least knocks out one of those variables. So I found that helpful in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So you feel like you're kind of taking care of one of those triggers. So then you can make maybe a more clear-headed decision.
Yeah, I don't have the bodily urge of hunger pushing me into that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Did you find out some of this through? It sounds like you're a researcher, like you like to do a little bit of research. So were you digging into this or do you work with a therapist?
Yeah, so um, quite a number of years ago, I had a therapist that I was visiting regularly. I probably should go back into therapy, but um, yeah, I don't have a therapist right now, but I did a long time ago. And I mean, I guess I just came at it from a problem solving standpoint of this, and it's so binge eating's. I mean, it's peripheral really to what I actually deal with, which is severe depression, severe anxiety, and depression and anxiety, as you probably know, are like best friends. They can't go anywhere without each other. So basically, after what, like 5-10 years of this just being one of the most dominant factors in my life, it drives and controls seemingly everything. I was like, I need to learn absolutely everything I possibly can about this because I live with it. So let's learn, you know?
Yeah, I think it's kind of that breakthrough moment that people have, especially if you have depression and anxiety and you're like, well, I guess this is it. Like I'm living with this, so now I have to
Yeah.
do something about it.
Yep. Yeah, fortunately, in my case, medication has been very helpful. Um, I was I the just two things that made the biggest difference. Um, and I wouldn't even say right now it's severe. Like it was, I got a diagnosis for a severe 2014. So it was like, the check boxes, and you got all these variables. I'm like, check, 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 check. Oh, I got a really high score. um, but the two things that really helped me get out of the ditch were medication and EMDR. And so the cognitive behavioral therapy, pretty helpful for me to deal with some of the underlying issues. Let's talk through it. But when the cognitive behavioral therapy then led into informing the EMDR, so we knew where we were going in the EMDR sessions, then I was like, okay, we're going to clear out the stuff. And I think that paired with medicine was really helpful. The medicine put the fires out. I had fires, and that helped me. The medicine immediately helped me to not be on fire. And it's like, okay, I'm not on fire. Now we can kind of move around the cabin a bit, see what's going on, and have like a targeted approach to EMDR.
EMDR has been coming up a lot for me lately, not like inside and outside of these podcast recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's making me think that it's something that I should look into because I have only ever done CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, I thought that was kind of the only type of therapy. I just don't know what you
Yeah.
don't
So
know.
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's
How did
it's
you come to the
painless. I mean,
conclusion?
it's worth it. There's no downside. It's
Yeah.
really easy.
Cognitive behavioral was interesting because for what I was dealing with, some of it was like self-induced pain. Like they're like, if you have a negative thought, snap yourself with a rubber band. They were things that you do
Right.
that, and it was fine. They're like, put some ice on yourself. But I had never considered that there might be another way.
I mean, yeah, like knowing your automatic thought patterns, that's huge. Um, the EMDR, I think, comes at it from, you can almost view the automatic negative thoughts, the ants that are crawling all over the brain. Those automatic negative thoughts are almost like a consequence, or they come from a source often. So you can, actually kind of similar to ants. You'll see ants crawling around in your kitchen eating fruit, and then you can squash them. You can have 100 ants, and you can squash each 100 of those ants, but there will still be more. They'll they'll come from the anthill, and so you can almost view EMDR as like looking across your yard, tracing the ants back, the automatic negative thoughts back to the anthill. Say, I see where these ants are coming from. And then the EMDR is a really efficient way of getting rid of the anthill. So it's pretty cool stuff.
That is cool. Like going straight to
Yeah.
the source.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I absolutely hate ants. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion, but it's
They're
one
no
of the
good.
only. I hold this opinion so strongly, and I don't have too many strongly held opinions.
Oh,
But
yeah.
this one is just like I hate them.
Yeah. It's understandable. Did you know that carpenter ants can spew acid up to like 3 feet?
Oh no! Just
Yeah.
another reason to not
Yeah.
like ants.
Yeah. Yeah. I once had an old house that was built in the late 1940s, and carpenter ants really got into the foundation. And so I had to treat the area and some of the trees that were on the land. And they would spew acid, so you had to like watch out because they'll get you.
Oh, little jerks.
Yeah, total jerks.
So I know that we are 15 minutes in, but I'm going to ask you how you're doing.
Hey, how you doing?
Thanks for asking, Joey. Um, Today, so like if you compare today to really like the start of my awareness that I had some mental health situations, it is like night and day. Um, so like I'm doing pretty good. Day to day, I'm on medication, and I'll be transparent. It's a generic form of Zoloft. So really common SSRI, I believe it is. Um, but I found a lot of success with that. It's something that you can use long term, and it just helps my baseline to not be in the ditch. I've tried to get off of it a couple of times with no success. And so it's kind of one of those things where I have to kind of learn to accept it, that this is, maybe it'll change in the future. I don't know. But at least for right now, this is what I'm on, and it's totally cool. I don't feel euphoric. I don't feel like I'm tripping on drugs or anything. It's just simply baseline, not in a ditch. It's a good starting point, you know.
It's a great starting point. I had a similar come to Jesus moment with my SSRI. It's a generic of Lexapro, and it was the first one I tried, so I was really lucky that it was successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, super lucky. But I remember going to my psychiatrist after like 2 years, and I said, "Well, when can I get off of it?" And she was like, "Oh, probably never. Not for you." And I was like, "Oh, probably
no.
never." Oh, okay. But then it kind of like that forced me to shift my perspective, because even after going on medication, I was still like, "Oh, I wish I didn't need it." Like I feel
Yeah.
it's that not wanting to feel weak or not wanting to feel like you're out of control of your emotions. But then when I actually do need it, and it's been told to me by someone who understands how these things work, I was like, well, it's time to accept it. Like, you just have to accept it. And I still, even then, there's been periods where I've stopped taking it so regularly or tried to go off of it on my own, which if you're listening and you're on an SSRI, don't ever try to go off of it on your own. It's horrible. It's so bad.
Yeah.
But medication, did you kind of have a similar idea about medication? Were you resistant to it initially?
Yeah. I was totally resistant. I don't know. And I guess like part of why I want to speak out on this is because I wish that I saw things differently in the very beginning. I felt like if I couldn't be myself without a drug, and if I needed medicine in order to be myself, then whoever that person was on drugs would be like the drug clone version of me. And then the real me would then be just the natural, no drugs Joe. And that I think kept me from even opening the door of drugs. And I had to get to the point where I was so miserable and I got shaken out of it, where I was like, this is so bad that I'm not even functioning. I'm not functional. So I gotta do something. I'm up against a wall. So that pushed me over the hurdle of that whole complex of identity and everything. And then I tried, went to the doctor, got some prescriptions. I actually got a couple of prescriptions initially. The Zoloft was a given, so I started on that. They also, because I was having daily anxiety attacks. They got me on I can't remember. It was like some pretty hard stuff that I can't remember if it was benzos or something, but something that I shouldn't have been on. It didn't help, but it made me feel like I was drugged. And I actually regret getting on that one. They kind of loaded me up because they were like, "Damn, you're doing bad," and I was like, "Yeah, I'm doing pretty bad." So I guess they just kind of threw everything at me. I do regret getting on that one because um, it wasn't safe even for short term use. Um, and then I also had a off label treatment with what do you call it? Propanolol, I think is what it's called. So propanolol is a beta blocker, and it prevents um, anxiety attacks as a short term. So you can take it day of, and essentially what it stops is the feedback loop of adrenaline to the brain, brain to the adrenaline. This awful feedback loop that just gets you into the spiral. So it stops the adrenal response. So even if I had things that would normally trigger the spiral, I couldn't spiral because the drug stopped the biological response, which is really helpful. That was putting out the fires because it was a fire every day, and so that was like the initial fire extinguisher. Fires are out. And then the Zoloft got my baseline up, but not before bringing me down, as which is common.
Yeah. It sounds like medication has been a huge helper in you reaching a baseline where you can deal with your mental health in other ways. So I would love to kind of shift the conversation over to
Mm,
how mental health in your career, because
yeah,
careers take up so much of our life, right? So
that's
like
correct.
how did those two go together for you?
Yeah, so uh, back in the dark ages, kind of when everything was at its highest intensity, um, it was in a professional setting. So um, the one of the most painful experiences I had during this was I was just getting to know a new hire. It was the CMO, so someone who was um, just coming in. It was like, I want to make a good impression. Oh, there's a lot of pressure on that. So I felt like, I think so. The simplest of things. Hey, let's put some time on the calendar to meet up. Low stakes, we're chill, right? But it was a week out, and every single one of those days, it built and it built and it built until when we actually met, I had an anxiety attack and I couldn't speak. I was just completely frozen. So, on top of the anxiety attack, now I'm embarrassed and call it a shame spiral. I was spiraling and it was really bad. So this is a professional setting, the most normal, hey, let's meet as like coffee, and it's like this is our normal thing that people do. people people try to meet each other, like basic, very basic. um so that was I think I was in denial for a long time, and then when it came to that, it was like, well, there's no denying what's happening.
How did that play out? I'm very interested because if you hadn't been open, I don't know, were you open about your mental health and anxiety at that time?
um Not in general.
Was did that then force you to have that conversation in a professional capacity?
Yeah, pretty much, because it was like, what the hell is wrong with you, what's going on? It was, yeah. So it was like, we're having a conversation now.
How
It
did
felt
it
a little
go?
bit too much like a therapy session.
Oh,
Um, she reacted um, uh, not in the most helpful way. So that kind of made it more painful than really it should have been.
were
So
you at
that
a
sucks.
were you at a small company?
Um, well, our immediate team, so there's like marketing communications team, and it was like 25, 30 people. So a small to medium sized team. So yeah. But that was definitely kind of like a wake up call to me. Or but you know what sucks about anxiety is then I became anxious about anxiety, because it's like if that can happen, then it's like I'm just gonna, the fear then was, this is gonna happen again. So that kind of started a vicious cycle where fires were popping up all the time.
The interesting thing about anxiety, I mean, there's so many interesting things about anxiety, but like you said, it's you can be anxious about being anxious, and then say you've decided to seek treatment, then you're anxious about seeking treatment and what that means. You're anxious about the act of calling and making an appointment and having to go through all these different things. And it is, I when you decide I think when you decide to get treatment, you're opening yourself up to a world of new anxiety. And it is hard to step into that new world because you
Yeah.
would almost rather live in this like the devil you know or than the
Yeah.
devil you don't know. Did you feel similar?
Um, I think I had my own personal experience was that I had gotten fed up and I wanted it to change. So I kind of ran to get help.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's great. Did it affect your immediate, like in your work environment, if your boss didn't handle it super well or new CMO didn't handle it super well? Did you feel like kind of the energy changed in that workplace for you?
So fortunately, I was very transparent with my boss. The CMO wasn't my boss, but I was transparent with my boss because it was pretty clear that's like something's wrong with Joe. You know, like Joe's not okay. So it was like an elephant in the room. And so I went ahead and talked to my boss about it. Like, this is what's happening. So having his, and he did react very well. He, he fortunately, well, unfortunately, has a family member who had similar situations. So he came um, with a great deal of care and support because it was hard for me to do that. But he handled it very well. And that helped me know that I had his backing and I had his support. So um, I think that's a lot of what made it bearable was, I mean, if I didn't have that, it would have been a lot harder, a lot harder.
Yeah, I think a good manager can make or break that situation for sure. Um, so you came out on the other side, right? Like you
Hmm.
had this bad experience. Now you've come out on the other side. So how is mental health something that you're taking care of now?
Um, so, uh, so a decade has passed, decade plus, and so I think part of it was just a period of time in my life, um, and the pressures that I was experiencing during that phase of my life that made that period of time so intense. And today, I still have lots of pressure. There's lots of stress. Um, but my mental health, even though I'm not really doing anything like really special about it, like I'm continuing to take the the Zoloft, but it's kind of something that is almost like a looming shadow over me because it's something that it's still there, and I kind of have to think about it once in a while. And I actually kind of sometimes I'm afraid that it'll get worse. And I've relapsed so many times because I tried to get off the medicine that I've seen that roller coaster. So it's kind of like a place that I want to go. I know I don't want to go there. Um, but day to day, I'm doing great. Like, I'm not in a ditch. I don't get any anxiety attacks. I am generally not depressed. Winter, it can be kind of tough sometimes, but generally not. And so, yeah. And to be at this stage is unbelievable from looking back on the perspective that I had before. It felt like if I was gonna get to this stage, it would have seemed impossible. Like that's just not even. There's like a sense of identity that you can have with being in the pit, where it's like I am in the pit. This is just who I am, and the darkness will last forever. So, but I didn't fully understand. Like, I guess I still held on to hope that it could get better. And I'm just like in marketing, gonna double down on what's working, keep on doing, make sure that I'm doing the right activities that are gonna move the needle. Um, uh, but yeah, just the idea that it could not be like a pit of despair kind of felt like it wasn't really gonna happen. But I still held on to hope and kept on um, working on things.
I like that you compared it to marketing, which is I find more and more as I am in marketing longer that I'm like, oh, this is just like marketing, or this reminds me of something
Yeah.
that I did at work.
Yeah.
What role?
I think too, like the marketing analogies abound. So like my little sister, who is actually no longer little, she's 22, I think. We're talking about like getting a boyfriend, and I'm like, well, all you need is qualified traffic and to be able to convert the qualified traffic. Yeah.
And has she gotten a boyfriend?
Well, not yet. There's no rush.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're chilling. Yeah.
I gotcha.
No pressure.
But you gave her like the blueprint. That's the playbook.
Yeah, that's right.
So, what role does the job that you're doing now play in adding more stress to your life? Do you find that you're still having to deal with probably a normal level of stress, but how does it work together?
Yeah, well, I think for me, stress is like there's the binge eating as a coping mechanism, and I think stress can lead me to do that. Um, but apparently, stress doesn't necessarily lead me back into the anxiety and depression, whereas that seems to be kind of like a separate beast, which is kind of cool. Um, but what I have found is that if I'm doing work that I dread, and of course, any job is going to have at least 10 or 20% just digging through weeds. So no knocking on that, but just really being conscious of the work that I'm doing and how that feeds back into my vitality and gusto and excitement. Because, and it's just interesting thing about depression, sadness, happiness, the human emotions, they're kind of like signals for what you're going through. So, say you stub your toe on a cabinet, pain, you look down, my toe is purple, I need to go to the doctor. The pain was a signal that you stubbed your toe. So pain in and of itself isn't bad. And so like being able to have a signal that, hey, what you're doing, what you're getting good at actually makes you miserable. Like if you feel miserable, that's a good signal to start developing in other areas so that you're focusing your expertise and your development in things that will give you energy and keep you on the right track. And sometimes, like I worked at a startup a couple years back, and I was on drugs. I was on Zoloft. But the work that I was doing at that time, I hated. It was dreadful. I dreaded it. Um, wasn't objectively bad. It just sucked my soul. Which, of course, again, power through, whatever. But if it's every day for years, then it's like, this is not good. And I was in denial that I dreaded it. And ultimately, the company changed and our go to market strategy changed. And all of a sudden, I realized, whereas the dreadful work used to be like 20%, now that kind of work is like 100% of my job. It's all I do. And so if I had been more aware and or not gone into denial about it, I could have been in a much better situation. I could have been I could have said like, I need to get good at something else that I don't hate, you know?
How have you been able to find, like, nurture the things that do fill your cup and make you feel fulfilled and give you gusto?
Yeah. So I think the first part of it is to become hyper aware while you're doing it. What because there's some things that when you do them you feel alive and you're like, I could do this all day every day. I find this fascinating, motivating. So there's a a guy named Dan Sullivan who is the founder of a program called Strategic Coach. They're an entrepreneurial like a mentoring coaching program. And one of the things that they focus on is basically dividing all activities that you do into three, where you find things that you find fascinating and motivating, and these could change over the course of years, you know, as whatever you find fascinating and motivating right now. And then you put in a second category things you're like, okay, I feel all right about it. Like it's not like kind of lukewarm about it. And then there's things that you dread that suck your energy. So dividing all your activities into these three categories and just being really conscious of your own um like how it's making you feel while you're doing it, and then be able to divide those into the three categories. Ideally, you would delegate or eliminate the things that you dread. In the case of a job, it could be finding a um, different specialty, shifting the kind of work that you do somehow. And then for the okay, it's, you know, you could hold on to a little bit, but it's less urgent than the dread. And ultimately, if you can kind of shift things around, the goal, even if it's just an aim for the time being, is to maximize the percentage of activities that you do day to day that fill you with energy and you find fascinating and motivating.
You seem to have a very strategic brain. Is the thing that motivates you the strategy behind things?
Yeah, I think so. Um, I like to see like the big picture behind things and put pieces together, and um, so like there's a part of me too that I like challenges, and sometimes if it's like it's really counterintuitive, but um if there's like say there's a company that's like, guys, we're kind of in deep shit right now. We're like, we can't seem to get our win rate is down, this and that. And I'm like, I actually find that exciting. So I'm like, let's solve the problem. It's kind of it's energizing to me. So I'm kind of weird in that way.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
What's bringing you the most joy from your career and your job right now?
Yeah. Um, so what do you find fascinating and motivating changes over time? 10 years ago, I used to be fascinated and motivated by cameras and lenses. And so within marketing, um, I've done a lot of creative execution. So sure, there's strategy, but then where the rubber meets the road is the creative or the writing or the actually bringing a strategy to fruition and execution. So 10 years ago, what I found fascinating and motivating was lenses and a whole bunch of nerdy stuff like that. Right now, I find complex sales cycles where you have like mid enterprise to enterprise, where you have to gain consensus across a buying committee and understanding the challenges that sales has and how sales and marketing can align to overcome those challenges. Something about all of that right now is really exciting. It's it just is.
And I love that you're giving space to the fact that what you focus on and what you care about changes over time, because I think sometimes we try to fit ourselves into the same box that we set when we were in our 20s and our 30s and our 40s,
Yeah.
and it isn't like that for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're dynamic creatures, and so like holding on to things from the past, sometimes it's time to let it go. If it's like you want to make way for new things.
I feel like you've given a lot of really good tidbits where this will be an easy question for you to answer, but if you were to
Okay.
give advice to a marketer, let's say you're giving advice to yourself 10 years ago, what would it be
Yeah.
about how to support your mental health while also following a career path that you enjoy?
So the first thing that I would say to my past self would be, um, you got to understand that you feel, and this is just I'm speaking to my past self, not like
Yeah.
general people, just my past self. I would say it feels like you are going through this process, depression, anxiety, and it's just you in your own bubble who's feeling this way. And everyone around you is looking at you like you stand out like a sore thumb. And granted, you did have that one anxiety attack, and that was, you're going to stick out. Yes. But it's really common. And there's nothing to be ashamed about. And even though it's so painful and so dark and feels hopeless right now, even despite the intensity of that, things can completely transform. And you can essentially be in what would seem like a new life. And it will take time to process, but you won't be stuck there forever. It's just a short period of time, relatively speaking. Life is long, and this is kind of like a little blip. So you don't have to give up. In fact, you shouldn't give up, because things can get a lot better.
That was really beautiful. That resonated with me a lot as well. I wish I had that same speech about 10 years ago where I really needed it. And I was feeling very much in my own bubble, that everyone could see me and everyone was judging me. And yeah, so isolating.
That's true.
Now, to make a total 180
Gear
from this serious gear shift from this very serious moment,
yes.
You shared with me that you have a dad joke that's wonderful and that you came up with on the spot, and I have not heard it yet, so I am so stoked.
Okay, so have you seen the series Lost?
Oh yeah, I love Lost. I mean, it's bad, but I love Lost.
Yes. Yeah, it's like bad. Well, they went off the rails. They jumped the shark right around the time traveling season. I can't remember what season that is, but they jumped the shark. And it was supposed to be a one season show, but they just kept on, maybe one or two, but they just kept on renewing. So
I did like season 2. 1 and 2 were the best, obviously.
But so then they were like, well, we got to milk this for everything it's worth. Let's pull out the time travel. Okay. Anyways, so there was a scene where the character Echo was looking for something, and the best case scenario for making. I'm also a really big fan of Mystery Theater 3000. I grew up on that. The guy sitting in the front comment. So this is my jam. So I'm in this ideal situation where I'm amongst friends on a couch and we're watching the show together, and I'm playing the voice of the characters as we watch. I can't remember the exact context of it, but I was speaking as Echo, and I said, I called this echolocation, which is super cheesy, but it was perfectly timed. I got lots of laughs, and I immediately filed that away as the best dad joke I've ever made. I actually haven't topped it yet. Haven't topped this. No. And it was not scripted. This was off the cuff. I guess it's kind of like obvious, which, typically for a dad joke, after it happens, you're like, oh my God. So I got a couple of those too. So
that was good. And I love that it married your love of Lost. I'm assuming you love Lost. And
it's pretty good.
Yeah. MST3K, which, do they do that scripted or is it unscripted?
Well, their bits are scripted.
Yes.
I don't know. It feels like they do it just
off the cuff.
It kind of feels like it.
What a dream job that would be, because I love talking through bad movies, especially. And not everyone enjoys being around me.
They were sent there for punishment. It's not the dream job.
That's true.
Maybe it's kind of turned out to be the dream job. I never really got into the bits in between though. I was like, come on, guys.
Fast forward. I thought they were pretty lame. Yeah, I had the same feeling. I was like, this is not why I watch.
It's not why I'm here
for the movie.
Yeah, let's go back through the doors and
get me out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the final 60 seconds, I'm giving you a soapbox, and I would like for you to take that soapbox and tell me what you're excited about, what you're working on, anything. It is your time.
Okay. All right. Soapbox. In this is just general purpose, like it doesn't have to be mental health or what's this?
Anything.
Soapbox. Okay.
This is your soapbox.
Okay, and who am I speaking to?
Oh, general audience, mostly marketers.
Mostly
Anyone.
marketers.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So my message to mostly marketers would be it's a timely message. So right now, economic uncertainty thing there's a strong wind, and I believe that viewing the marketing opportunity, the opportunity for growth during this time, is viewing that strong wind as either a tailwind or a headwind, depending on where you stand. So if you find yourself in headwinds, turn around, and that strong wind becomes a tailwind. So there's the common refrain of do more with less, and marketing budgets are getting cut, and all this kind of stuff. And so this is a strong wind. There's uncertainty. Sales cycles are longer. Even like customers going or prospects going through the process of vendor evaluation, and it's like they're slow to close. Well, I'm on a soapbox, so I'm going to get on a soapbox. I also think generally, initial projections for growth should be reevaluated. If I'm really going to get up on the soapbox, it's like, hey, like there's some there's some things that you want to recalibrate with reality. So, but at least if you're just like a marketer and you're just here's a fun mental health tip: don't internalize those pressures. Just don't internalize it. Okay, that's part of the soapbox, but so there's a lot of things that we've known have been broken about, say, marketing, sales, and even CX in the way that we work together. We know that that's been broken in a lot of ways. And so during this time, during strong winds, let's fix it. Let's get it unbroken. The model of throwing an MQL over the fence and then sales takes care of it. Try to get a better system. Don't do that anymore. Account-based marketing professionals have really leaned into the idea of a unified team, where even CX is a part of a unified account strategy, and you don't have to get buy-in to like invest in a dedicated account-based marketing strategy to say, hey, we're like throwing MQLs over the fence and we don't see them ever again, and let sales deal with it. Let's stop doing that. Let's really, the idea of getting closer to revenue, getting closer to the customer. I mean, marketing, ironically, even though we're responsible for a lot of the customer facing messaging, never talk to a customer. So anything that you can do to get closer to the customer, closer to revenue, and even on top of that, optimizing bottom of funnel, so that if you're going for efficiency, so if you're anything you're doing top of funnel, if you can optimize bottom of funnel, top of funnel will then become more efficient because you're not driving your top of funnel into the leaky bucket. Okay, I think that's the soapbox.
That was a great soapbox, Joe. Thank you for being a guest. I will include your information in the show notes so that if people want to follow you, they can. Okay. Is there anywhere else that you want them to follow you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way to go. And yeah, I think LinkedIn's probably a good way to go. I also have a podcast.
Shout out.
Yeah. I also have a podcast which is called the Moving Up Market Podcast. So that's focused on essentially that stage where a lot of startups go through, where they've already found traction on SMB mid-market, and now they're moving up market, where they're trying to position product and growth into enterprise.
Okay, I will definitely link that in the show notes as well. So, listeners, if you like the sound of Joe's voice and his ideas, I like the sound of your voice and I like your ideas. So, I will be subscribing. You can find it in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here, Joe.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.